Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to the Wisdom of, and I'd like to introduce my guest, Bruce Cardenas. You know, we live, as I say all the time, in an increasingly complex world, socially, politically, economically, technologically, and we're facing challenges in every level. And now, more than ever, there's a need for better leadership, greater leadership in the world, stewardship of the things that matter. And in these conversations, we explore the wisdom that people that have taken a different pathway to many might have acquired over that time, and people that have had success that others might want to have might have acquired over that time. You know, we're in an age where we need this renaissance of wisdom. We need people to go deeper and think more completely and more profoundly, rather than the superficial tips, tricks, hacks of social media and trends and influences. And so as we unpack these complex issues, the goal is to have insights coming out of that people can lean on. And so today I'd like to welcome Bruce to the call. Welcome, Bruce. And I'm so grateful that you've given us the time to be able to meet with you today.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for, with the time zone difference that we worked this out. Perfect.
Well, if you choose to live in such a remote city, you're always, trying to match time zones with people. It just goes with the territory. You know, Bruce, you've had a different pathway to most. From time in the military, in the Marine Corps, and then time with the LAPD. For how many years were you with the LAPD?
Full-time 12 years, but I've been in reserve with the sheriffs now since a total of more than 30 years with a combination of both departments.
Yeah. And 20 meritorious citations. And just let me check so I get it correctly, the prestigious Police Star for Bravery. So, you know, it's a work history of note and really community service and contribution. I don't think that's the kind of job you take for economic gain, I suspect. I think it's the sort of thing you probably do to make a difference.
Correct. Yeah, mine was always a boyhood dream. I mean, I had an uncle that was a police officer. My neighbor was a police officer, and it's just something I always dreamed about. You know, I mean, a lot of young boys, you want to be an astronaut or a scientist, and I always wanted to be a police officer, and I'm grateful that I was able to, accomplish that goal.
Well, you would have learnt so many things, particularly human nature, I suspect, and how to deal with people. But the entrepreneurial spirit, you had an entrepreneurial seizure during your time with the LAPD, and left the LAPD and then went to Quest Nutrition, which is interesting. But they had under your leadership, had a $1 billion exit, I believe, and this is nutrition as in supplements and things like that. Is that?
Well, Quest Nutrition was primarily known for their protein bars. That's what we started first. I think we had 14 flavors of protein bars before we introduced anything. Never supplements, all protein-based stuff.
Yeah, right.
Powders, cookies, chips.
Okay, and which is, that's a significant entrepreneurial journey to have taken, and now you're helping people with brand and positioning and all sorts of things in the entrepreneurial world. So it's eclectic, the pathway, through this very community service oriented role and into a really deep business role. And I think with that diverse kind of background, through the Marine Corps, through the law enforcement, through corporate leadership, I'd love to know how your approach to leadership has evolved and changed over time, not just because of the changes to the role, but as time has passed. We're talking about a kind of a 30-odd year period of time now. And how has your leadership evolved and changed under those scenarios and time frame?
Well, I think early on, I was even as young as when I was a young Marine, I was more of obviously a servant leader. I mean, under other people's command. But one thing I found is you learn from the people that you're reporting to, right? You learn the good and bad. And I quickly learned what I wanted to be like, and then I also learned what I didn't want to be like. And a prime example is when I was a young police officer, my first training officer was a old senior guy, had 30 years on the job. And I remember the first day I got in the car, first day out of the academy, I sat in the car and Bob drew a picture on a notepad between, there's a notepad between both partners. So you make notes if you're on a way to a call or something. And he drew a picture of a face. If you can picture this face, and it had two big eyes and two big ears and no mouth. And he said, "That's you, Bruce. I need you to do a lot of looking and listening and not a lot of talking. Are we clear?" I said, "Yes, sir." And 25 years old, just out of the Marine Corps, so I knew all about listening and paying attention. The interesting thing is I didn't like Bob's style. He was very matter-of-factly, a little condescending. But he taught me one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned in my life is the ability to listen to others, to listen to understand. Bob also taught me how I didn't want to treat people as a leader. And I'll give you one quick example. We had detained a guy for a warrant, that big white biker, all tatted up. Brought him into the station. He had a $3,000 warrant, which was not uncommon in Los Angeles. A lot of people run around with warrants. It's not a big deal. But I found myself, because I watched how he conducted himself as kind of a cynical, more jaded guy, I was being a little rough with this suspect, bringing him into the station by the handcuffs. And a lieutenant saw me and called me to his office and said, Bruce, I what he asked what the guy was there for, and I told him. And he said, I saw you're being a little rough with him. He goes, "I know why." And he goes, "Because you're working with Bob, who's cynical and jaded and needs to retire." He goes, "But I want you to understand." He goes, "I know the Bruce that's everyone likes in the station. You're always laughing. You're always smiling. You're a natural born leader, but you're becoming a follower." And he goes, "Bob's going to retire soon, and you need to make your own way." And it was really a defining moment, because I realized Bob was changing who I was becoming as a leader based on me following him. So that was that moment in time, it defined who I was. And I realized I became my own leader, while I'm a servant leader, I really truly learned how I wanted to lead myself and how I wanted to treat people. And that a lot of people are a paycheck away from a crisis. And, I truly learned how to relate to people on a street level, no matter where they came from. So that really started defining me as a leader.
That's I mean, it's first of all, how fortunate that lieutenant saw that
Correct.
and pulled you aside. And I have this belief that over the course of a lifetime and a career, we're all significantly affected by a relatively small number of mentors along the way that have big impacts, right? And
Right.
the challenge is noticing it when it happens, right?
Right.
It's not whether you had great, often on this show, I'm asking people who were the great mentors. And maybe I should rephrase that, because it isn't who were the great mentors. It was, why did you notice that at the time? And this lieutenant had the wherewithal to pull this aside, but you obviously also heard it loud and clear. And
Correct. Because I could have,
go on.
No, I apologize. No, yeah, because I could have easily ignored his advice,
Of
because it
course.
wasn't like he was writing me up. Or maybe he never saw that, and I would have continued down that road learning from Bob, and then ended up becoming off probation, and then started going down that path, which I would have considered normal based on spending a year with Bob. So
Yeah.
I'm actually grateful the lieutenant saw it, counseled me, and advised me. And really, the biggest takeaway was, he said, "Bruce, just think about that guy who he was probably maybe 35 years old. He goes, he's someone's uncle, brother, cousin. He goes, for all you know, he has a 10-year-old son home that admires him. And imagine if his son saw you treating him less than respectful." And that's what really drove home, like, gosh, I had an older brother who spent 3 years in prison. And I thought, my older brother was always truly a genuinely nice guy. He just got caught up in some drug issues. And I thought, I wonder how my brother got treated when he got arrested. And
Yeah.
that's how I started looking at everybody. Everyone I encountered, I thought, well, that's someone's mom, that's someone's wife, that's someone's boyfriend. And who am I to really be disrespectful to anybody?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I conducted my life, and that's how I do it in business now too.
Yeah. Sadly, we live in a world where respect and courtesy and having that first thought that that other person could have a bunch of stuff going on, because everyone's got something happening, right, in
Right.
the background. But sadly, we live in a world where that is not the first thought that people have. We look at the way people pile on to other people on social media and things like that. We've
Mhm.
lost a lot of that respect. I just want to follow up on um, the lieutenant who
Yeah.
pulled you aside and said, he said a few interesting things. Everyone in the station likes you. You're obviously you've shown up in a positive way, but I'm seeing you behave like the guy you're riding with, and that's not who you want to be. That's kind of interesting. So over your whole leadership career, have you then seen how have you paid that forward? Have you seen other young people stepping into more senior roles who are taking on qualities and characteristics from other people that they think should be the people they're emulating, and you've pulled them aside and said, think about this for a moment. Where else have you seen that, even in the corporate environment and things like that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I truly embodied what that lieutenant said to me, and I was only had a couple months on the job. I was a young police officer when I was off probation, and I went to my next assignment, and I was equal. I get in a car with an equal partner. I quickly because what happened, and I had many incidents like this where when especially you work in Los Angeles, there's a lot of rough areas, a lot of the ghetto, and I remember I was assigned down at South Central where pretty much on every street corner, there's people out of prison just hanging out. They can't get a job, they're on parole. But the normal is when police stop it, and it doesn't matter, it happens everywhere around the world. You stop someone that's less than desirable, maybe they're tatted up, they obviously look like the first instinct as cops is, hey, let me see your hands, let me see your ID. They want to kind of shake them down. And I can appreciate that. You want to make sure, okay, what are you doing out here? You're not selling drugs. But I found my partners always being rather condescending. And what I found myself doing was trying to find a common ground with these guys. And what I usually did, because I still lift weights, but I used to be pretty big, and somehow it would come about weightlifting, and these guys out of prison would say, "Oh, how much can you bench?" Because that seems to be a normal macho guy thing, right? And I, one thing, and I used to power lift, so I'd say, "Oh, let's just I do 400 pounds," and they'd call me, "Oh, that's bullshit." And I ended up a couple times getting involved. I had a push-up contest on the street with guys from right out of prison. Now, what that did, it did two things. I got down on their level, literally. So I'm doing push-up contests
Yeah.
with these guys. Sometimes I'd win, sometimes they win, but I would always make excuses. I had all this equipment on, so it weighed me down. But my partners would at first would think I was out of my mind to do it. But when I got in the car with my partner, I say, I need you to understand something. If we ever have a problem down in the ghetto here, it will not be the guys that we've been having these encounters with, where I've been doing push-up contests or talking about lifting weights, because I've been respectful to them. So just imagine if we ever get the shit hits the fan and we're in a trouble. I'm not worried about those guys. And I really changed people's mindset. Other cops I work with, because they always were on the defensive.
Yeah.
Hey, screw these guys. They're bad guys. I said, listen, they're out of prison. They've already done their time. Now they're just looking for a job. So I did that my entire until even now I work with guys. They come across a little too aggressive, and I say, listen, guys, just think about this. I say the same thing to at my age with older guys, because sometimes cops could be a little condescending, to be honest with you. And I say the same thing my lieutenant said. I said, that's someone's mother, father, brother, cousin. How would you like it if your sister was pulled over and you were talking to your sister, someone was talking to your sister like that? And it's harder as you get older because it's a little more awkward to say it, but I have a standard line now. I just say, listen, I just want to treat everyone with respect until they do something bad to us.
Yeah. Certainly. So, people talk a lot about, the younger generation, entitled, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I have, I actually have great faith in the younger generations coming through. I think they're more, I think they're compassionate. I think they care about things. I meet young people who care about things way more than I did when I was their equivalent age. I cared about sport and things like that. Um, and it's not actually good enough for us to be saying, oh, we're worried about the younger generation if, as the older generation, we're not willing to mentor them and actually share some wisdom and things like that. So when you're working, what triggered this question when you're saying I got down on their level, literally, and you're doing push-ups on the street, as an older leader in Quest Nutrition, in a corporate environment, even in the police force and the military, but certainly in business where the stakes aren't necessarily life and death,
Yeah.
you would have young people and young leaders coming through all the time that would benefit from your wisdom. And we still have a lot of older leaders in business who mightn't, who might struggle to figure out how do you get to the level that a young leader coming through is operating at to be able to have that conversation. Have you had young leaders in business particularly that you've mentored through, and how did you find that commonplace with them? Because sometimes people can struggle with that.
It's definitely hard because, there's a lot of people in leadership positions that were virtually there based on a multitude of reasons, right? But
Yeah,
but but I always say this: the most qualified people are not always leading companies,
no,
and sometimes it's hard conversations. But like I remember at Quest, we created this culture, right? Some of the leadership was a little rough, like they just really weren't people. They weren't people related. But I had the good fortune, like I'm thankful to this day. There was a gentleman named Tony Shea who started Zappos,
yep,
and he wrote a book called Delivering Happiness. I was fortunate enough to spend a day with him in Vegas at his office, and I absorbed everything because I was truly I'm a kind person. I'm a servant leader, and I left going back to the office knowing that delivering happiness was important, and I would instill that in these meetings. And we decorated our building with all these quotes and things, and even though I think people might have been resistant to it, we built it out so that people had no choice but to smile when they walked in the room. Um, Unfortunately, you can't change some people. They get in these positions of authority, and I always try and educate people. This just like I'll give you an example. A company I'm helping now. He's struggling. He says, "I don't think anyone likes me in the company, Bruce." He's the CEO. So I said, "Look, can I spend a day with you and just hang out?" And at the end of the day, I said, "I need to share some things with you, good and bad, but I need you to understand something. You told me you have an open door policy." I said, "But I saw your door open, but when I've chatted with the employees, they cannot walk down that corridor because you have an executive assistant who I referred to, if you remember, Carilla DeVille, the old
yeah, yeah,
scary lady." I said, "She's your gatekeeper. So you really don't have an open door policy because you can't get past her." And he said, "Well, all they have to do is make an appointment." I said, "That's the problem. You claim you have an open door policy. That means someone should just pop in and say, 'Hey, Bob, can I have a word with you?'" But that was just one thing. And then he also thought, he goes, "I have a great culture here." And I said, "What makes you believe that?" He goes, "Well, we have a really cool break room." I said, "So you think because you have a couple of vending machines and you put a couple PlayStations in that doesn't make culture? Culture is something when you walk through the front door, you feel it.
yeah,
When the receptionist knows your name and the custodian knows your name." I said, "You have a business that you want people to believe is a good culture, but you're honestly not being honest with yourself." And I said, "When's the last time you've actually gone out and sat in a cubicle with just someone, let's say just the lowest level person?" He goes, "I don't have time for that." I said, "You actually do have time. You just don't make time."
yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
and that is a cultural comment too. I don't have the time for that. So the culture of this place is
and
we
I
don't have
and
time
I
for people.
yeah, and I fought back and said, you actually should carve out a day a week and bounce around and sit in a cubicle with one of your kids. I call them kids, right? They're all young, IT guy, customer service, and say, "What can I do as your leader make customer service a better experience?" I said, "Do you know how then people will go to the ends of earth for you if they know you sat with them for an hour
Yeah,
and maybe brought them?" I said, "They will go to battle for you, but right now you're just a paycheck to them.
yeah,
You're a paycheck, and when 4 o'clock comes around, they want to be out of there at 3:59, and they don't want to see you." But at Quest, we started building this cool culture where people. I remember I'd worked late a lot, and I remember I'd be leaving like 6, 7:o'clock, and people still be in their cubicles because they loved it. It was just a nice environment. They didn't want to go home, but that's hard. That's hard to accomplish. Not all leaders can embrace that.
well, there's a few interesting things out of that, but firstly, when he says I don't have the time for that, he's actually setting the highest level example of we don't have time for people in our company. And that
Yeah,
becomes a
yeah,
cultural marker. I worked in my corporate career under a guy. It was a $1 billion business unit. He was in Sydney, we're in Perth, in Western Australia, opposite sides of the country. It's like LA to New York,
yeah,
and he would come out a couple of times a year and visit our business unit, and he'd want to walk around the factory. And he was a great mentor of mine in the end, but he spoke multiple languages. So he'd go up and speak Spanish to one of the guys on the factory floor, and within minutes, the guy's in tears, and he'd go and address, my leading hand by name, and I'm walking back and I'm going, "What was that?" The guy was in tears. He said, "Oh, last time I was here, his wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer. I wanted to know how she was." This is like 3 years prior, I mean,
Yeah.
Brent, how could you possibly know that? And he pulls a notebook out of his pocket and he says, I just make notes. That's the exact opposite of what I've got plenty of time to make notes and know about my people. And
Yeah.
culture is fascinating. Culture is what we do, but the
Yeah.
output is the character of the company. And the
Correct.
marketplace judges you by the character of the company and how you show up, how the company shows up. So we do culture, but it creates character. And every leader should be questioning what kind of character would you want, the world to see from your company. You made an interesting comment. I want to dig in on it a little bit.
Yeah.
You said basically, I'm a kind person. Um, One of our company values is kindness and be complaint free. And kindness is a currency that isn't always evident in the world. But I actually think kindness is a strategically competitive advantage, to be honest, in so many ways. And I'd like to just dig in on that a little bit because sometimes people think you've got to be, tough and all at it. And you have had a career through the military and the police
Hmm.
where no doubt you've been in conflict and serious conflict at times. But I think this spirit of kindness has such a superpower to it if you figure out how to be kind no matter the scenario. And I'd like to, if you're willing to, I'd like to just pour in on this, you know, kindness as a leader and what that can actually benefit people. Just this simple notion of be a kind leader.
Yeah. There's a term I don't remember. I mean, it's I think it's global where people used to say "kill them with kindness." I don't know
Mm.
if you've heard that
Yeah,
term.
yeah, yeah. We have it. Yeah,
I don't. I mean, listen. Here's the end of the day, and it's truly authentic with me. I mean, being kind to people. It's like being grateful. Every employee, no matter what their rank or position, why would you not want to be kind to the people that you're benefiting from economically, financially? They're providing for everything in your life. To have gratitude towards them and be kind is just it's almost should be at the top of the list when you walk in the door of a business. We deliver. I used to have the area where my area was. It was called Delivering Happiness, and only took that I stole it off of Tony Hsieh's book, obviously
yeah,
Delivering Happiness, but it should also be delivering kindness. So delivering gratitude. Um, to me, it's not a human trait that always resonates to the top for some reason, but I think if more people did that, I think the results would just be tenfold. And that's not hard. I mean, so here's the thing: I delivered kindness when I was a cop. I delivered kindness when I was slinging protein bars. To me, they're the same to me. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
It's just a different arena.
yeah. It isn't really a trend that is always evident at the top, and yet the best CEOs I've ever worked with, either as a consultant or working for, were people that had I didn't necessarily know it at the time, like I didn't really identify it at the time, for
Yeah,
what it was, but the very best CEOs that I've consulted to and worked for have a baseline of kindness. In other words, I love what you said. Why would you not be kind to
yeah,
the people that are actually creating the things that you're trying to create? And I think in the push and shove of business, people, the term, oh, it's just business.
yeah,
You can do what you like to people, really. It's just business. It's actually
yeah.
never just business. It's always about people.
Of
And
course, yeah,
it's an interesting,
yeah. It's also interesting what people, especially leaders, what they believe about themselves. We were at the height of our success at Quest Nutrition, at the height, financial success. But there was grovelings inside. People were not happy. And we decided to take an anonymous survey, completely anonymous.
yeah,
And what happened was people said, and they said by name, we're not happy with this person, because they ignore us, they treat us disrespectfully, our ideas aren't welcome and thought out. And these were three leaders in our company. But yet on this outside, you would say, oh, they seem like such nice guys when I come meet them. Everyone's so warm and fuzzy and kumbaya. But when you took a survey, 145 employees, the top three names came up as people that they just didn't want to do business with, and that was a wake up call that we were almost like hiding it, like okay, no one, this is like a dark secret. And then when it was exposed, we had to address it. And three people exited the company over that. They exited the company because 145 employees said you're not really kind people, and we had to make a decision that are we going to sacrifice 145 the morale of 145 people for three? and
yeah,
and uh Well, we actually concluded they weren't going to change because here's what's interesting too. I steal it from, I mean, no one's ever created any of this, right? But a term called extreme ownership, which you know from Jocko's book,
Yeah.
they couldn't take ownership in this survey. They didn't say, "Oh my gosh, you guys are right. I've been ignoring my employees. I haven't been respectful." They said, "Oh, that's BS. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm leading this ship the way it should be run." So because they couldn't even take ownership was really the reason they had to leave.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll get you to dive in on extreme ownership in a minute. I've been involved in many corporate consulting projects where there's
Yeah.
been 360-degree surveys done or employee satisfaction surveys or whatever. And, a fair percentage of the time, when the results come back to the C-suite or to the management team or the leader of the business unit or whatever, uh, you know, there are percentages of time where people say, well, we're just in a tough market at the moment. Things are unsettled. People are not happy. Like it's external forces creating this level of dissatisfaction. We should do the survey again in another 6 or 10 months, when things are better. And, it is this lack of ownership. I'd love you to dive in on this concept of extreme ownership a little bit, because I think that is a quality that great leaders probably all display.
Yeah. You say that great leaders all display, or
I would imagine they all display extreme ownership.
yeah, the good ones,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. Oh,
Like
okay, that's interesting. So there's great leaders who aren't necessarily good. That's
well,
true.
no, I'm saying there's leaders, but maybe they don't take extreme ownership. I'm
Yeah,
not saying if you're a great leader, of course you do. But I just have been educating myself recently about the Japanese culture in business that the owners, like if there's failure in a company, a lot of times the top guys, the top people step down. They don't start chopping from the bottom. They'll step down if they can't
yeah,
get their company right.
yeah,
Um, I listen to me, whenever I talk to someone and they start doing this, they start pointing like, oh, well, this failed. They start pointing to the left and the
yeah,
right instead of saying, you know what? Yeah, I actually own that department. You're absolutely right. I failed the company. I need to correct that. But it's so hard. Who wants to, I mean, gosh, even back when you're a kid and your dad asked, did you break that window? No, like no one wants to just take ownership of what they do in life. And it's not always easy. But in business, if you can't, you have to do it. It's got like, and the buck stops once you get to a C level. Of course, it's your. Oh,
yeah,
you have to take extreme ownership. What are you going to blame the new kid that just started?
yeah.
If you didn't train him properly and he did something that was not to standards, it's really your fault.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
100% leadership's fault. You can't say, well, he did. You know, that's just a reality of life. But not everyone can. Not everyone can really bear to take that responsibility.
Well, external to the company, the corporate regulatory authorities um, slate all responsibility back to the CEO.
Yeah,
So, externally, the world applies extreme ownership to the CEO and to the C-suite. Internally, it is the thing that, you watch sporting teams that lose the game, and then you see a coach in the presser afterwards who is kind of subtly putting the blame on the players. We didn't close it out. We weren't disciplined in the end, as opposed to the coach that says, I probably didn't call the right play, in the last few seconds, or, we weren't prepared. I hadn't kind of set up properly for the game. Who do we think the players are going to give the best effort to next time round? It's a really simple kind of analogy. So
right.
this kind of leads us into a bit of a conversation about ethical dilemmas.
Mhm.
Business is littered with um, ethical challenges for leaders all the time. Do you make the right decision or do you make the easy decision? And sometimes the right decision isn't the one you want to make, but it's the right one. And once again, you have experience through the military and through law enforcement that has probably put you in the frame of ethical decisions much more often than maybe other people find themselves. Do you have a process that you go through, or do you have an intuition or just a mental unpacking when you're confronted with an ethical dilemma? You have to make a decision. So
Yeah.
you've got to make a decision one way or another, and how you work your way through that. And I'm really looking for the coaching lessons out of this for other leaders and other young leaders, particularly when you've got to make a tough decision and there's an ethical dilemma involved.
Yeah, I think whenever anything involves ethics, I try and do the best I can through life. I call it keeping my moral compass face north,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um, Ethics to me is almost it's honesty, right? Like you want to do the right honest effort for what you're trying to accomplish. And I think why we have some latitude in judgment, even when I was a police officer, there's times where I've encountered people that probably should have gone to jail, but I had to make a decision on the spot. I called it, we live within the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, right? As I said earlier, the guy that I stopped that had the warrant, or maybe
Yeah.
someone, had a very small amount of drugs, and you make a decision. Okay, this decision, this ethical decision, this could send someone to jail for 5 years, or is it going to be a conversation I'm going to have that could change his life forever? So we're faced with that every day. For me, whether it's a Marine, a cop, or even in business, but I think I always try and think about where my moral compass is facing, and am I doing the right decision to benefit both the customer, the citizen, the company, myself. If anyone's going to judge us down the road, did we do the right thing based on our ethical decisions? So
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, you need to know what your north is
yeah,
so that
yeah,
so if if you're facing it, right, for a start.
yeah, right. That's just
And
my term. I mean, a lot of people, when I say my moral compass face north, they're like, what? Like when I have to explain that, I go, well, what your morals are. You know where you're going to
yeah,
always go this way. If you
but I
decide to
wonder,
go the opposite, yeah,
yeah, but I wonder if people haven't always consciously thought through what their north is. And then, you've just outlined ecology, really. What is the best decision for me, for my staff, for the customer, for the company? Ecology is, from every possible angle I could look at this from, what's the best decision? So it's interesting, decisions that involve ethical judgments or ethical dilemmas are never judged under the test of history through your lens. They're always judged through the lens of the other side.
correct.
And if you
Yeah,
haven't gone around the table and looked at that situation from all angles, um, there's the real risk that you make a decision that's ethically flawed. You're never judged through the lens that you were personally looking at it through. That's just not how the world works.
correct. And I'll give you an example. One of the best examples, when we were at Quest, in the height of our success, the peak of our success, sales were through the roof. A study came out in France about basically fiber, the source of fiber we use in our bars, and it contradicted what we had been doing. We had to make a decision. We could have kept going the course we were, just kept producing product, but we knew that once we found out about this study, we knew the right answer was to change the formula. So we made that decision. And interesting, you say we're judged on
Hmm.
on well, we made that formula change, but it didn't go over well with the public. And what people, after, let's just say, millions of bars went out there, and people started looking at the packaging and saying, "Oh, Quest cheapened their product." We didn't really cheap it. We just changed the fiber source, and they then attacked us. And when I say they attacked us, we went from, I want to say it was $440 million a year in sales, and we dropped 15% in sales.
Hmm.
15% of 440 million, based on the public perception that we cheapened our product, when in fact we were doing the right thing based on a
Yeah.
study that we discovered. And so, like you said, we were judged publicly, executed based on a perception of what they thought. And internally, we're like, we're doing the right thing. We're making a choice. We're making a decision to be honest with our product. So sometimes, and it turned out it ended up, over the course of time, we course corrected and came back up. But right away we were attacked based on what people perceived us doing as opposed to what we're really doing.
Yeah. Well, it's the issue of opinion versus
Yeah.
evidence, and to have and hold an opinion. First of all, you need some information that forms that opinion. But to
Yeah.
hold on to the opinion, you actually require ignorance of all evidence to the contrary. Like, you can only believe the world is flat if you choose to ignore all evidence to the contrary, right? And so
Right.
opinion is in part informed by ignorance, which is kind of fascinating, because we live in a world where people are so um, enamored with opinion today as opposed to fact and evidence. Um, Interestingly, you're consulting these days
Well,
to business owners and entrepreneurs and others. You played a pivotal role. You're the chief communications officer for Quest, and as we've said before, they went to $1 billion exit. So very successful company, $440 million
yeah.
in rev and everything else. And so obviously you're consulting and helping people in their business journeys today. I'd love it if we could unpack, just in the remaining time, the
Yeah.
2 or 3 biggest lessons you would, imagine you're taking a very motivated, kind, young entrepreneur, the right kind of person, right? Um, you know they're going to do great things, and you know they're going to do great things the right way and the best way, and you want to give them the best leg up that you can, and you've got enough time to give them 3 big chunks of advice. What would that advice be for this person?
Well, for me, and I don't know if I told you this, but we sold Quest. We started a company called Legendary Foods right
Yeah,
away after that. We're going into almost 4 years old now, so we're having the same trajectory as we did at Quest. So that's kind of a fun run.
yeah.
Um, just in the States right now, but we're going to eventually go, I think, next year to other internationally. But I think for me, some of the best advice, if you have a consumable item and you're just starting out, you got to weather test it, if you will, right? So I have friends of mine that have started companies, a consumable item. A friend of mine made a cookie company, and I said, well, he did this mass production, 50,000 pieces he ran, and he put it online, and he was trying to sell it, and people weren't buying it. And I said, well, I told you when you started your company, I said, weather test it, make batches of 100 cookies, make another 100, get them to all your friends and family. As a matter of fact, don't even get them to your friends and family, get them to strangers, and have people tell you their honest opinion. But he didn't. He invested a bunch of money, did this big production run, 50,000 boxes of product, and it wasn't moving. And it was because he didn't weather test it and test if it actually worked. So in other words, it just wasn't a good product. He didn't
Mm,
spend the time in R&D. So I'd say this to people, whether it's a consumable item like a drink or a cookie, or even if it's a T-shirt and you want to start a T-shirt company, make some small production runs, get people to buy into it, tell people, make sure they love it, the feel, the texture, whether it's taste, texture, ingredients. That's the one basic thing that people sometimes skip A, B, and C and go
yeah,
right to D. And at Quest, we were making bars by hand at night. We'd make enough, sell them on our website, make another batch, sell them on our website, to the point where people kept, and then the demand. So the reorder came into play too. So reorder is really key to anything, reorder of products. And the other thing is, um, this is a very simple practice. If you want to get to $1 million, you need 1,000 screaming fans. And I don't mean 1,000 screaming fans on social media. It has nothing to do with social media. I break it down like this. I tell young business people this: if people like you, they're going to listen, right? Because
yeah,
inherently you want to like someone. You're going to listen to them. But if they trust you, they're going to buy from you. But here's the crazy thing in having a Quest: if you transform people's lives, they're going to go to the highest mountaintops and scream your name. And that's what happened at Quest, because people started writing us saying, "Gosh, I lost 30 pounds in the last 4 months because it was my go-to snack. I've got diabetes and my blood sugar doesn't spike. I've got celiac disease because you're gluten free and I'm able to eat your product." And what happened was we had these over the top, I say, fans, like screaming
mm,
fans, and it went from 1,000 to 10,000 to 20,000. Everyone wants to accomplish that same thing. So if you have a consumable item, an experience, or a service, whichever one, no matter what business you're in, you have a service, experience, or consumable. That's the goal, to get 1,000 screaming fans. People want to spend money on all kinds of crazy ads and campaigns. You got to get product in people's hands, and you got to get people to reorder.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it doesn't even matter if you have even if you have a travel agency, you want people to buy your service and reorder. If you have a construction company, do that remodel and reorder. It doesn't matter, because it's applicable to every business. It's not just a one and done, right? That's what I say.
yeah,
It's not a one
yeah.
and done.
So, the reorder is the measure of customer satisfaction, not the happy sheet and the smiling
Yeah.
faces and things like. The evidence is in, the numbers tell the story ultimately. Um, Fantastic. I'd love to ask 2 or 3 quick
Yeah.
questions just to find out a bit more about Bruce Cardenas. Just for background information. If you could have been sitting in any big conversation in the world at any point in time and just sit in and listen to what was really being discussed, what would you love? What big conversation would you have loved to have been able to observe?
I'm not really a tech guy, but what Steve Jobs and Wozniak did early on, I'd love to hear how that went, because I heard
Yeah,
they had a
yeah,
lot of challenges.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I'd love to, know now they're probably I think the cash richest company in the world, but the early days, the early conversations, the struggles, you know.
yeah. I'm with you on that. I saw a fascinating interview with Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. at a tech conference, and they'd
Uh-huh.
spent time together in their youth working
Uh-huh.
on stuff. And Steve Jobs had cancer at the time and was looking unwell. And the interviewer said, you know, you two guys must have talked about so much. You know, you both, you two are the geniuses of the you know, the technology world. And Bill Gates stopped. And he said, no, no, Steve was the genius and the visionary. I was the businessman. And he said, and he turned to Steve, and you remember when we used to talk about set point technology? You've got to move the mouse around the screen with the arrow buttons versus floating point technology, use a mouse. And he said, you reached over, Steve, and you put your hand in front of the screen and said, Bill, one day people will just go like this with their hand and the mouse will move. And it's got to be float point technology. And you know, they were Steve was dying at the time. You know, it was very late in time, and I would love to have been in those early conversations. I agree with you. I think it'd be fascinating with the benefit of today to reflect back on what were they talking about, right? So,
Right.
in that sense, then, if you could go back to any time in history,
Ooh.
where would you go back to, and why would you go there?
I think at the turn of the like 1776, when our forefathers in America, anyway, it's important to us when they were writing the Declaration of Independence and all the things that are still applicable today
Mm,
and how they affect us, because they were relatively young men
mm,
in their 30s. I think some maybe in their 40s, and think about how advanced they were to write laws that are still on the books today. That especially freedom of speech and
mm.
right to bear arms. I just love to know how they survived, because they had death sentences upon them for the British wanted to take them
Yeah.
out. I think it'd be fascinating to know what kind of bravery men had at that time to unite in such a small group. I just think it was a fascinating time in history that really created what the United States is.
And the debates they must have had because they didn't have an internet to look it up on.
Right? Yeah, yeah. You imagine. You almost sometimes even now at my age, because sometimes everything's instant gratification on these phones, right? I was reminding someone, I was just speaking at an event the other day, and I said, when I was a young cop, I used to have to go home and check my answering machine. And they go, "What about your cell phone?" I go, "There was no cell phone." Like, I would go home and hit a button, and someone would say, "Oh, hey, Bruce, if you can call me when you get a chance." There was no cell phones. There was not. It was just, and it's only quick how quick we've evolved.
Oh
That
yeah.
wow. I almost sometimes I wish life was like that again.
Oh yeah. My first trip overseas as an 18-year-old, I had to get my parents to wire me some more money, and I sent them a telegram to ask for it. It was
Yeah.
it was yeah, things have changed. If you could
Yeah.
invent something or solve any problem in the world today, what would it be?
It would be medically related. A little side note. Well, cancer's plagued my family. My father died of colon cancer early. My brother had brain cancer. I feel like 6 or 7 of my relatives have died of cancer. And the irony is Ron, who started Quest and now is the chairman of Legendary, out of his own pocket puts about $2 million a year, which is and it increases each year strictly in cancer research.
Hmm.
So I'm so grateful that he's got passion play. So that's a passion play of mine. I'd love to find an answer or even a cure in the cancer realm. I don't know what that means to invent something, but something that would obviously cancer, is going to kill most of us. If it's not cancer, it's going to be heart disease. So cancer seems
Yeah.
to be our passion play more
And
than
there's
anything here.
and there's so much invested in trying to actually deal with it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to contemplate that there's breakthroughs being made all the time, but it's
Yeah.
probably the most researched medical condition out there in many
Oh,
respects.
trillions of dollars. We're doing some very cool advanced things with CO2, and we're doing actually we have a whole medical staff. Part of our headquarters is carved out with a laboratory. So
Mm,
that's kind of a passion play for all of us.
interesting. Well, Bruce, thank you so much
Yeah.
for spending this time with us. My shout out to anyone watching the show would be to listen deeply, listen through a lens 2 steps down, um, and listen deeply to the wisdom Bruce has been sharing about. Servant leadership was a term he led off with straight at the top of the conversation, and this idea of just understanding what might be going on for the other person, coming from this basic place of kindness, which does not mean weakness. It's actually a superpower in so many ways. Be the person that other people want to follow because of the type of person that you are, the character that you have. Understand where your true north is, because you will be confronted with ethical dilemmas over the course of any period of leadership. And at some point, you must have a true north to go back to, and a willingness to look at everything from all angles, because you won't be judged from the side of the problem that you're viewing it from. And then in business, just some really, really solid advice. Test the product, the service, or the experience that you actually take to market. Make sure people want to buy this thing. Find those 1,000 raving fans who are actually putting money on the table, and then get the repeat, the resale, the repurchase experience for them again, and drive a company that makes a difference, that actually does something solid. So Bruce, thank you so much for the time you spent with us. I really, really appreciate it. And there's all these little gems all the way through the conversation if people just take the time to listen deeply. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor.